Can you believe it? I've owned the R5 C for 4 years now. I bought it on the pre-orders in 2022 and I've loved it ever since. I've always had this camera in my bag. I can't live without it. So I thought maybe this is a good opportunity to make a video about, is the Canon R5 C worth buying in 2026? Let's find out. I was a working creative at the time and I was just looking for a rock solid camera that would get me by every single day. I was about to buy the R5 and I was actually on a job and we were using the R5 as the camera. We had it sitting on a robot arm actually, and it was sitting there in idle. I don't think we'd even pressed record yet. The client asked us to change a few things. Next thing you know, camera was overheated. The thing hasn't even pressed record. We hadn't even put anything on the card yet. And just sitting there in idle, in 4K, cooked it. Specs. Now I don't like talking specs specifically because not every camera choice should be made on spec alone. Especially cinema cameras. There's a lot of cinema cameras out there that the spec isn't that great, but the image quality is as good as it gets, and that's actually the thing that people look at. They don't look whether it had Bluetooth connection, or they don't look whether, you know, there was an easy way to change some setting in the camera. At the end of the day, the image that comes out of the camera is actually the most important part. The R5 C is obviously the cinema version of the R5. It comes with its own cinema menu, which at first was very, very overwhelming. But now I find the everyday Canon menu harder to use than the cinema menu. One of the upsides to the cinema menu, you can actually be in the menu while the camera is still recording. If you've ever used a Canon camera, you'll know that when you're on the consumer cameras, like the R6 Mark II that I'm recording on right now, you can't actually change stuff in the menu while you're recording. One of the reasons I wanted this camera was purely just the photo video, so that I could go from photo to video in just a switch. Now, when you change from photo to video on the R5 C, it actually shuts down that camera. So if it's in photo, it's running as a photo camera. You get the regular photo menu, the regular Canon menu, and then you switch it off, like you switch it into video, and the camera shuts down, and then it reboots up into the cinema menu. So then you have cinema video menus when you're in the video mode. That does take 1, 2, 3 seconds to change over, which on a job can feel like a lifetime. The R5 C has many color profiles. There's neutral and all those, you know, normal ones you expect from any Canon lineup. It also has the C-Log, but it's only C-Log 3. There's no C-Log 2. And so some of the newer cameras like the RV, the R6 III, and the R5 II, they all have C-Log 2 and C-Log 3. C-Log 2 has been in the cinema line for a long time, but it never made it into the consumer bodies. Now, I think that's not as big a deal as you may think. I mean, it's still, C-Log 3 is still a very flat profile. C-Log 2 is a tad flatter, but for me, I struggle to really tell the difference there. Like, yes, there's probably more you could pull out of the C-Log 2, but the C-Log 3 is such a beautiful profile. I just find that I always use this as my A cam when I'm on a job where I'm using the multi. This will be my A because I still think the R5 C has the best image quality out of any of the cameras I own. Saying that, the R6 Mark III's image is phenomenal, but if I was putting it, you know, side by side, I'd still think the R5 C would come out on top. Now, don't quote me on that. I mean, you can, but I have done no specific testing. That's just my general feeling about the subject. When I was buying this camera, this was a very, very big decision. I think it was, what did it come in? Retail was around $6,000 or something. You can now pick these things up secondhand for around $2,000, depending what country you're in. Prices may vary. But for $2,000, I reckon this camera can do it all. Now, the only thing it can't do is vertical. It can't shoot vertical. You still have to rotate that in post. That's because you're in a cinema camera. It's not a consumer camera. Now, another thing that this camera doesn't have is IBIS. It does not have in-body image stabilization. Personally, I prefer that. This is a camera that you're gonna rig. I mean, you kind of have to rig this camera. There's a few reasons why, and I'll jump into those a bit later. But once you start rigging a camera, you don't want IBIS. You don't want image stabilization. It gives you all those weird warps and whatnot. And so if you are putting this on a gimbal or on some sticks, or once you sort of rig it out, it becomes quite heavy. So it is not something that is too difficult to manage. One of the reasons I thought, I should probably make a little video about the R5 C is because it is 4 years on. You know, cameras don't generally last that long. New cameras come out and they're bigger and fancier, and everyone wants to dump their old gear and go and get new gear, which I've done. I've upgraded cameras, but I just can't find myself to sell the R5 C. I find it too valuable to have in my bag. I just did a national campaign a couple of weeks ago, and the camera I chose to use was this, the R5 C. I chose it because it is rock solid. This is the one you can jump onto a job and switch it on, and it's gonna run and it's gonna keep going, and the image is gonna be beautiful, and you're not gonna have any dramas with it. There's so much value in the fact that you can confidently pull this thing out of your bag, press record, and it's gonna do that. And it could be 40 degrees, or if you're in America, it could be 800 Fahrenheit. I don't know how Fahrenheit works. But yeah, it could be really hot, and you think, oh no, and this thing will just keep on going. Like I said, this camera is 4 years old. There's lots of newer cameras out there on the market that spec-wise could match up to the R5 C. Every time Canon releases a new camera, I think, oh, I wonder if this is the one that's gonna, you know, knock the R5 C off its top perch. Now, for me, the only thing that's come close has been the R6 Mark III, and that is purely codec. So the reason I bought the R6 Mark III was to match it to this camera. So the R5 C has the XF-AVC codecs, and the R6 Mark II just shoots in a MP4 codec, you know, like a H.265 or whatever it is, doesn't matter. But the R6 Mark III is the one that you can choose all the different codecs, just like the R50V. There's a few different codec options there. The R6 Mark III is in this hand, and the R5 C in this hand, and this is a fantastic pairing. You know, this can be your A cam, this is your B cam, and then this is your content camera. So if you're going to do, you know, just vertical socials content, you would go and take the R6 Mark III. If you're going to do real documentary style production work, commercial work, something that is worth more to you than socials, I would be using this, the R5 C. Now, something that people probably do overlook is codec. I think codec is a very important part of a camera's workflow. So when it comes to workflow, I find the R5 C and the R6 Mark III, the workflow is incredible. Those codecs are super easy to edit. I don't have to do any transcribing or converting or proxies. Premiere just loves it, just runs it. So the battery life on the R5 C is pretty horrendous. So it takes these new Canon batteries, but it didn't come with the new Canon batteries, but it does take the new ones. So if you run a brand new camera, brand new battery in 4K, 25 frames a second, you'll get about 50 minutes of record time. If you put that into 4K 50 frames, you'll get about 25 minutes of record time. And if you go further and put more strain on the camera, it'll do much less. So 4K 120 or 100 frames, you'll be looking at, you know, 15 minutes of battery time. So something to note on the R5 C, to be able to shoot 8K, you need to be running the camera off power. So it needs to be running off at least 60 watts, which can be mains power, or you can use like a power bank, but it has to be able to put out 60 watts, and they don't all do that. But this does. So this small rig plate, I just screw that onto the top of my cage, and then I have a few of these batteries, and they last a long time. And then you just slot that in, and then all I do is have my USB cord go into the side of the camera here, into the USB-C port, and this camera will run forever and ever. Well, not forever, but I can hot swap this battery without it being a problem. Photo, it'll just work like a normal photo camera. It you know, would last days, like your normal photo camera battery would. The thing is, if you're buying this camera and you know its limitations, you can work around those, and therefore you don't need to worry, you know, like it's not like, oh, I'm so surprised that my battery doesn't last very long in this camera. We know it doesn't, and the camera is a beast, and so of course it's not going to. You get the new Canon batteries, they definitely last longer than the previous ones. One of the things I absolutely love about this camera is one of the simplest parts, which is just here in the video options. Wait for this thing to turn back off and back on. Bam, that's how long it takes. Now, you go here, you go into your menu and see this, the full frame. So this is a full frame 8K, and then, but if you had, say you were shooting 4K, so I'm shooting 4K because most things I shoot is 4K. One of the things I do love about this camera is if you're shooting in 4K, because this is an 8K sensor, I can actually go in here and go to Super 35 crop, which then puts this camera into a 35 crop, which is a 1.5 times crop on your current lens. It's a really ingenious way, and I actually love this feature. This is one of those really simple, but a feature I use very, very regularly, and it is actually on the R6 Mark III, but it's nowhere near as easy to implement. It's in the menu, and it's not a full 35 crop, and that's all that. But this is actually a really great feature. So if you were, you know, on a lens that wasn't quite long enough for what you wanted, you could go to the 35 crop, and then you could pull the lens back and get exactly what frame you want. And I just think that's such a overlooked feature of a camera like this. I use that feature very regularly, and I miss it when I don't have it, because instead of having to reframe the shot, I can just crop in on the sensor and I don't lose any quality. And you can't even tell that you've done it when you're in post. It just looks exactly the same. If you said to me, hey, I need you to go out and shoot a national campaign tomorrow, the camera I'd pick up would be the R5 C, and I would definitely take the R6 Mark III as my B cam. If you said to me, hey, we're going on a job, but we don't really know what it is, it could be a bit of photo, it could be a bit of this, it could be something that, I would probably take the R6 Mark III, purely because it's the camera that can do it all. You come over to the card door and you've got CFexpress Type B. You have a SD card. When you shoot 8K or 4K 120, that will only record to the CFexpress card. So if you don't have one of those in, you won't be able to record. But personally, I think the CFexpress card is much better than an SD card anyway. They're cheaper, faster, more reliable. Now, the other thing I wanted to probably take note of is the autofocus here on the R5 C. Now, when you're in photo mode, the R5C's autofocus is incredible. It's no different to any other Canon camera. It has the dual pixel autofocus, face tracking, eye tracking, all that's in there. It's fantastic. Doesn't skip a beat, touch screen, all that. The only problem with the autofocus is when you come into the video side. It's still very good, don't get me wrong. It's an incredible autofocus. It's definitely not as snappy as like the R5 Mark II or the R6 Mark III or any of those, you know, pro consumer cameras. But saying that, it's still really great, and you sort of just get used to how it performs. 2026, yes, I still think the R5 C is an incredible camera. They've definitely come down in price over the years, so you can pick them up online for much less than, you know, a new prosumer camera. That the spec on this thing will still blow it out of the water. So if you're looking for an absolute workhorse, rain, hail or shine, R5C definitely gets you there. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.